Alrighty, guys. My name is Brian Vosper. I am here with Norm Kurland. We're going to be doing the Just Third Way podcast today. This is going to be our first one. We're going to be trying to bust these out every single Wednesday for you guys. Really excited to do this. I'm interning here with CESJ, the Center of Economic and Social Justice, till about December. But basically, I'm just trying to help them out, get more well known. They've got some amazing ideas when it comes to tax reform, healthcare reform. Anyone that's into business, they have some great ideas that are basically just going to revolutionize a lot of things we're doing when it comes to stocks as well. And so goal for you guys today is we just want you guys to get the most out of this, just learn some cool things about CESJ, and hope you guys enjoy. Giving you a little background on Norman Kurland, he's the president of CESJ, but at the same time, his professional work goes into EEI Consultants as well. That's where they help create ESOPs for companies, and he also is he's president of UniteAmericaParty.org. We're seeing a lot in the world today that even though we have political party differences, I think the main problem we need to focus on is putting those aside for a second. Let's all come together, just come up with a solution to how we can tackle political drama, but as well as economic drama, a lot of things that are going on. And so that's a cool platform you guys can check out as well. He has a lot of experience. He's a Chicago law graduate. And he also used to work with the federal government in a lot of different organizations involving trade commissions as well as the war on poverty. His goal is mainly to provide a better world for future generations. And so...
Hi, Brian. It's good being with you, and we're delighted having you as an intern from Brigham Young. We've had other great interns from Brigham Young, and we're happy to have you and what you're able to help us with and help us to communicate to millennials. That's a major objective of the Center for Economic and Social Justice.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here too. Well, the first question I had for you, Norm, is what is CESJ for those who don't know out there?
Yeah. We were formed in 1984, but I've been working on the ideas that are promoted through CSJ and the principles of economic justice, the principles of social justice, which most people are still think of these terms as the problems. No, we look at it as the principles that people, if they understand it, can work together to change the system, which is now breaking up unity in your country. There's no vision for how you can how wealth can be produced in a way in a more democratic economy. With the concept being that political democracy, as important as it is, will not work without economic democracy. So we try to define our terms, but these ideas were not originally mine. These are a combination of other people who, throughout in the last 50 years, I discovered the ideas of Louis Kelso and the great books philosopher Mortimer Adler, who wrote a book with a title that I would not use, but and that was in 1958 to counter Karl Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto. They called it the Capitalist Manifesto, but it wasn't monopoly capitalism. They agreed with Marx that monopolistic ownership, concentrated ownership, does corrupt those in power and leaves most of humanity in a very weak position economically. They become dependent. They become slaves. wage slaves or welfare slaves or charity slaves. And Kelso would agree that concentrated ownership or monopoly capitalism is not good. But he was talking about a new system that would be beyond monopoly capitalism, but also beyond what Marx was predicting or suggesting and proposing, and that is that the state, or what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat, would be the owner, and no individual would have private property, because the Communist Manifesto said you can summarize the entire philosophy in a single sentence, and that was abolish private property. Well, Kelso said, no, wait, let's understand what private property is. You don't eliminate it. It isn't the things you own, whether it's natural resources, land, or very advanced and advancing technology. No, what's essential for a free society, a democratic society, is that all citizens, every citizen, should be able to become an owner as technology evolves, as corporations evolve, so that you can't separate out an economy strictly on the basis of do they have jobs. No, you have to look at production and how people earn the income necessary to buy whatever is being produced. And so he came up with a new paradigm. And I didn't know of this until 1965, because I became disenchanted with what the federal government was doing in the war on poverty. I could see that it was top down rather than bottom up. I had a civil rights background, as you mentioned, and then discovered that in the poverty program, it was really getting money to leaders, not in ways in which you organize the grassroots so that they can help themselves. So that's back in 1965, and Kelso and I became involved together. We worked together. First, I actually left the government to go to work for something called the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty, which was basically made up of liberals. There were a lot of socialists involved, but I was there to try to get the message of expanded ownership as not capitalism, not socialism. We call it the third way, and I could explain the history of that if you're interested, on why we now describe the new paradigm not as just a third way, but as a just third way.
Yeah. Just so you guys, this is actually a concept that I really love about CESJ. It's called the just third way. He talked about it a little, but basically there's three types of government. You got capitalism, socialism, and then there's another one that they proposed. It's called the just third way. And something that I really that caught my eye when I was learning about this, they have something on their website called the Green Growth Paper that gives pretty good insight to what we're doing. If you guys want to listen to that in your free time, they have a lot of free ebooks as well as articles on their site, as well as interviews you can go watch. It's at cesj.org. Just go to once you can go there, click on the archives section, and they have so much information that even that book he was talking about, even though he didn't agree too much with the title, the Capitalist Manifesto,
is on it's a free download. And then the second book by Kelso and Nadler, where it was called the New Capitalist, but then the subtitle was A Proposal for Freeing Economic Growth from the Slavery of Savings. He meant past savings, because bankers often say that if you don't have savings, you can't become an owner. And Kelso pointed out, and it wasn't his idea originally, but he pointed out that you could finance growth out of credit, which is like a contract. And banks used to, at one time in history, was called the banking school, that banks really created money out of thin air as long as it was going to be backed by assets. Now, in today's economy, the U.S. dollar was supposed to be backed by assets. It was supposed to be stable in its value. And as a matter of fact, they use gold, for example, and that's just one form of asset. That each ounce of gold would cost $32. Today, an ounce of gold is $1,400. That's telling you something. It's telling you that something that was supposed to be stable, that is a unit of money, should be like the yardstick. You know, there's so many inches in a yard, or if you're measuring, or temperature can be measured. Well, the same thing as money. Money should be stable and not something that becomes the equivalent of counterfeiting. Just bring more money in for the same production. It automatically means that you're going to hurt the poor because prices are going to go up, and those whose income is very limited or who have no way of increase. You could have disabled people who could become owners. As a matter of fact, in our Just Third Way, what we call Capital Homestead Act, there's a history to that. Every child, every woman, every man in society, every citizen would have access to the means to finance the growth of an economy in ways in which they become owners. They get the power of ownership and the rights. What property really is a set of rights and even limitations on those rights, but it's rights, and it gives you power of control and the right to enjoy the income earned by whatever you own. And that should not be the income from capital ownership, which is displacing labor in form of robotics and artificial intelligence. That if people could own the robots, even if their job is displaced by the robots, if they own the robots, then whatever value is created by the robots in terms of marketable goods and services become an income to whoever's the owner. And as we say, a very basic principle is that if you believe in democracy, you should understand that political democracy will not work without economic democracy. And that's what's happened in this country, in America, and throughout the world. In other words, people have become increasingly economically dependent on Big Brother, the state, the new God, than the state being economically dependent on the people for providing justice to all the people and securing their lives. So in other words, the system is the problem, but the system was made not by God. It was made by people. And when people organize enough people power to move from or remove the injustices of the system, introducing more just system, then no one can stop it. In other words, we're not totally dependent on those who are now creating money, particularly when they're doing a bad job, as our Federal Reserve is, but rather it's giving everybody an equal opportunity to gain economic independence, economic power, and otherwise they're going to be slaves to the system.
Wow, I really like that. I kind of was wondering, so we got a lot of topics on equal ownership. I think it just kind of moves into the Just Third Way. So I was wondering if you could teach us a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So what is the Just Third Way?
Well, because I'm very sensitive to words, and I think words separate people. And capitalism doesn't attract people on the left. Obviously, they see that. So I was looking for another term. John Paul II, the Pope, did his dissertation on personalism. Now, if you like isms, that's the only one that I like, because we're talking about every person. How do we empower every person? Well, in any event, I used to use Kelso's language, and even Kelso changed. I can explain what he substituted, but I used to use the term democratic capitalism or universal capitalism, and Kelso and I, after I left the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty, he asked me to head up the Institute for the Study of Economic Systems in Washington. And this was in 1968. And Kelso was a very successful lawyer. He became a successful investment banker. He was also the inventor of the employee stock ownership plans, which he and I were able to get a leading politician to Senator Russell Long, one of the most powerful. He was the head of the Senate Finance Committee. We got him to become the champion, and the laws were passed in '73. This is after, as I said, we formed the Institute in '68, and I spent some time trying to build some political support on Capitol Hill. Well, when we first opened, I got a call from the Soviet Union to see whether I would meet with two of their people. And I said, oh, fine, yes. And they're probably both KGB. One was an economist, the other studied Capitol Hill. So this was in '68. And they came over. And while Kelso and Adler's first book, The Capitalist Manifesto, was a bestseller in its first year, most Americans didn't read the book. Very few had read it. And certainly in Washington, I couldn't find people who were familiar with the book, even though but in any event, they came over and we talked, and they said before they came to the United States, trying to prepare themselves for whatever work they would do, they both read the Capitalist Manifesto. And so we discussed that, and they both used the term, this is the third way. So I said, and that's exactly what it is, because it rejects the weaknesses of capitalism, but there are some strengths in capitalism. It's what Martin Luther King said it well. He said there's a need for a new synthesis beyond capitalism and socialism. But he really didn't understand. I met him before I learned of Kelso. We both, I met him on a plane going down to the funeral of Medgar Evers, who was one of the great civil rights leaders in the '60s. And he and I became friends. I worked in Mississippi. That's when I was working in civil rights. And so we were working very closely. And when he was killed, I went down to his funeral and I met Martin Luther King on the plane. But again, that was before I had the Kelso concept. And so I never got into that. And then later we met with a lot of people in his organization, but not with King. King was so articulate. If all I would have had to do was to explain the basic principles, and he was so eloquent, and that I think then all Americans in the world would have learned of the just third way. But in any event, we called it the third way then, until the term was perverted by Bill Clinton and Tony Blair from England and another ally of the United States, others who are in a circle, and they call for the third way being a combination of political democracy and capitalism. And by that time, I said no, because they're talking about monopoly capitalism, and that is not a good, it won't work. So I said, well, what I learned from Kelso was not only a theory of economics, but as a lawyer, I learned his theory of justice. And that made a lot of sense, economic justice, and it had, three principles. And once you hear those three principles, you can see it in systemic terms. And that was in chapter 5 of the Capitalist Manifesto. Brilliant chapter. And anybody who wants to see it also should read the preface, the foreword by Adler, who once was a socialist until he heard Kelso's ideas. This is a man who was a senior editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica 3. He wrote something on the great ideas of the Western world. The great books. He was the founder of the Great Books programs, in which many people started reading these things. So he was a profound Aristotelian Thomist philosopher. And when he heard Kelso's ideas, he realized that this was revolutionary compared to the existing economic systems. So all these things were very, very important in the foundation of the center. So I worked with Kelso until about 76, and I considered him my most important teacher, but we did have a split after we accomplished some things together, and it's not there. It doesn't make it. He and I still remained respectful of one another, and I was off by myself by 76, and there I became president of something called Agenda 2000, and we're trying to implement these concepts, the Kelso employee stock ownership plan and other expanded ownership back then. And then eventually a few people introduced me. This was in 1980s, early 80s, to another profound teacher. He was Father William Ferree, who was a leader in the Marianist order. He was chairman of Dayton University in Ohio, but other universities. He was considered one of the great Catholic thinkers. And he did his dissertation on social justice. And so he was in his 80s, and he would drive from Dayton every month for what he called his monthly pilgrimage. He would stay at our place, and he would teach me what he had. Well, he had written pamphlets on social justice, which you can get some of his writings right from our website. But again, he taught what is social justice and what it is. Because I saw how it works in the civil rights movement, we were able to eliminate the laws against segregation by following the principles. And that is, if what social justice is a part of moral philosophy, of how the individual, who when he sees a system or an institution, whether it's the state, the family, the religion, corporation, labor unions, academia, as deficient in one way or another, and he has an idea of how to correct it. But you can't correct a system. It's different than your relationship justice between you and another individual. It's you and what do you do about an institution that's unjust, and you have a way of helping to correct it. And you have to know that in social justice, You can't correct it by yourself. What social justice says is you must organize. And of course, that's how the civil rights movement succeeded, was through organizing people until you had enough, quote, people power to overcome the resistance to changing the system. But of course, having worked in Mississippi and from '62 to '64, no one thought it would be possible because of the political situation to lift the barriers to segregation. And yet, by '64, you mobilized. There were students who came together. And it was both, you had Medgar Evers and Aaron Henry, leaders in NAACP, and Medgar was assassinated, but SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, came in and organized and confronted the White Citizens Council there. They went right to Greenwood, Mississippi, in which you had many racial disputes and violence, and a few of the people in SNCC were assassinated, 3 students. And then SNCC was very intelligent. They realized you couldn't just stay there. They invited students from all over the country to come into Mississippi in '64, what they called the Mississippi Freedom Summer. And therefore, the media picked it up and really got involved. And so there was enough people power and idea power so that President Johnson was able to enact the law lifting the barriers of segregation. That's '64. Also in '64, the War on Poverty came into being. And there they were supposed to, in what was called the Community Action Program, they were supposed to lift the barriers for the grassroots groups to come together and try to address poverty problems. And I wrote the guidelines for the Community Action Program on maximum feasible participation of the poor. And that's the reason I shifted from civil rights into the poverty program, because I saw now you had to address the poverty issue. And I didn't have an answer other than redistribute. Jobs and welfare were the demand. These were wrong because they depended on the state. They did not build ownership, but I didn't understand the ownership. I wasn't looking at the ownership. I was looking at Milton Friedman, who called for a negative income tax. Just use the tax system to redistribute to the poor. Or others, people from the left, were calling for a guaranteed annual income, similar to what some of these corporate giants are now advocating, a basic income for the poor. That's still leaving them as welfare slaves. And that is not, slavery is not what we should. But in any event, at that time, I was hoping that the poverty program would be a source of funds. As a matter of fact, I was getting funds to grassroots organizations in California and Arizona and a few other places. And then I found that those above me didn't like the idea that they wanted to get the money to the leaders, and therefore I was ready to quit. And somebody came into my office, Mark Goldies, who was a part of the Free University movement out in California, and he visited me and introduced me to the ideas of Kelso. And within 15 minutes, I said, oh my God, this is so great. Why didn't I think of that? And so I quit the government, as I mentioned before, to get to try to change the system. But you can't change it by yourself, you see. And that's where, when Father Ferry in 83, I learned of his ideas of social justice. Well, that conformed to how you change things. This is similar. There was another situation in '65. Martin Luther King went to President Johnson and wanted voting rights. We want to have voting rights in '65. And President Johnson said to him, you got to make me do it. And, and that was the challenge to King, and he mobilized the people power. And in 65, the same year, we had the Voting Rights Act. Those are not sufficient. Everything in the past is insufficient because it did not deal with economic democracy, which is possible once you understand how the system, how the tax system, how the welfare system, but most the inheritance system, you can deal with the issue of ownership in such a way that you don't have to take the property rights away from the wealthy. You can once you mobilize, once millennials do what they did in 64 to eliminate racial segregation, once they say, look, let's now become a model again for what America was intended to be. It was intended to be something that recognized every person, and it would enable every person to be free. And the founders, many of the founders, other than slavery, which was our original sin, those founders understood that every citizen should be economically independent. That when they formed the United States, they didn't do it for money. Those going in other words, the political process, the invention of America took place through individuals who believed in freedom, except for the slaves. Now that we get rid of slavery, now we have to see how the descendants of American slaves, together with other all Americans, can get together from no matter whether they're rich or poor. On principle, we have to again become the model of justice in the world.
I really like that a lot as well. I didn't want to throw you off, but you said that's what millennials did in 64.
It's 64, the Mississippi Freedom Summer.
But I didn't want to throw you off, but are you just referring to the younger generation? Because those aren't millennials, right?
Oh, no, well, the millennials are anywhere between 17 and 35.
Oh, okay.
See, as a matter of fact,
I think that's the generation right before millennial, right? 17 and 35.
17 to 35. Many people define millennial as.
Yeah, just the young.
But those are the people, you see, who can who well, first of all, the future is theirs. They're going to be living in it. Mm-hmm. If they want to live in a system in which they are going to be wage slaves or welfare slaves, that's not a good system. Yeah. That's dividing you up. That's the basis of crime. Why do people go into crime? Because they don't have equal opportunity. So we have to have a moral system. Morality counts. Justice is one of the basic moral objectives. The search for it's what's called the universal, the promotion of truth, justice, courage, temperance, you see, ways in which are habits. We have to develop the habits personally to understand that we can become fully human. And that means you have to see where economics lies within what the human needs to be fully developed as a human being. And so Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, economics is at the bottom. It's the most urgent, but not the most important. But you have to, these are our animal needs. We have to eat. We have to meet our economic needs in order to survive, and then with that, once you have that, the higher needs, like your social needs, your political needs, and then finally your need for developing to every person to their fullest potential. That's where the education system is falling is failing today because they don't teach justice, and therefore they teach that education is for the purpose of getting a job. No, the purpose of education is to teach people how to think and how to develop personal moral principles and habits that enable them to be as effective as possible. But the present economic system, particularly the money system and the tax system, but the money system most of all, and that's why we've had demonstrations at the Federal Reserve. We need the people power that can study what the Federal Reserve is doing and seeing where they are going way off from what they were intended to do under the Federal Reserve Act, Section 13. They were supposed to create money for growth with a stable currency. Now they're talking about full employment. Why not full ownership? You see, and that's what we've been promoting in Congress. We had Hubert Humphrey call for, when he learned of our ideas. He had a couple days of hearings on Kelso's ideas, and he called for not just full employment anymore, but now universal access to ownership. But still, that there are no laws that lift the barriers in the present system. So that's where the millennials have to come together, and others. It isn't a matter, but I think that the energy should be there, because for example, I tell people when I took my undergraduate work at the University of Connecticut, it was a year's tuition. It was $125 a year. $125 a year, 2 semesters. Okay.
Dang, we're all wishing it was still that. So
yeah,
people at UConn.
And now somebody who goes through, I had the good fortune, to have gotten a tuition-free legal education. That was a great privilege. I didn't know what the law was. I had no friends who were lawyers, but that was a great education. But today, a lawyer going through, or somebody going through undergraduate work and going through law may have accumulated $1.25 million. That's what I saw in the newspaper. $1.25 million of credit. And then they come out and they hope that they're going to get a job with one of the big law firms. And now they used to hire new lawyers or graduates to do research. And now they have artificial intelligence, which can provide much of the research. And so the system is not what it should be. Yeah. And that's where we have to get people to understand that ownership is the route to go.
I really think that. So, giving you guys a little bit of background of me, I'm a political science major at BYU. One thing, although I am a political science major, I am going for an MBA. I would love to get into international business and marketing, but at the same time, I actually have started up my own company called Hive Pomade. And so one thing that I really like about all these ideas is that they're trying to really teach more how politics and economics go hand in hand. If you're trying to call for you're trying to call for justice in government, we need to start out with economic justice. And so that's the thing. One thing that might kind of throw you guys off is that when he's talking about equal ownership, sometimes when you throw that out, like, I don't know, maybe anyone that's a top executive or someone that plays the stock market might have just totally tuned out at that point, because you might think, oh, these guys are just trying to take money from me or do something like that. what CESJ is doing, they are not trying to go for just freebies and stuff. They're huge advocates for hard work. In today's society, that phrase he was using, wage slaves, what that refers to is that there's a lot of people that work ridiculous hours to try to provide for their family, pay rent. But at the end of the day, a lot of times it doesn't completely do it. And there are a lot of people out there that are losing hope with the government debt continually increasing, things becoming more expensive, people talking about how there's going to be solutions, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like you got just tons of stuff that is just causing people to lose more and more hope in what government is doing. So to give you guys just a little clarification, they believe that hard work is necessary. That's something that you can't replace. But at the same time, there is a method called the third way to basically address how power is so concentrated in certain businesses and how they don't want to take the money or existing shares from the rich. If you're trying to just tax the rich or do something like that, that's not fair for them. But what they're trying to do is you can create another layer of stocks with a thing called ESOPs, equal stock ownership plans. And I was actually looking the other day at ESOP.org, so that's ESOP.org, and there are actually over 7,000 companies currently with equal stock ownership plans and over
employee stock ownership
plans. Sorry about that. And what's happening is that over 17 million employees in all those companies are getting helped out a lot because it actually treats employees more equally, kind of like how the name says. But at the same time, it makes people have more incentive to become economically independent, to go work hard, to stay with the company and be loyal, because at the end of the day, they're actually seeing that the company truly cares about them because they receive a portion of those gains yearly automatically, rather than maybe like some sort of retirement plan or 401k that companies just hand you, but a lot of people don't take advantage, or that you can buy stock in the company. It's not explained super well. And so this is very important. We're gonna just ask a few more questions to Norm to help us understand a little bit more what ESOPs are, and then we hope you guys tune in next time. Also, we're going to be doing these once a week every Wednesday for hopefully the same amount of time. And if you guys have any questions, make sure to visit the site cesj.org. They've got tons of information on there, ebooks that you can download and listen to and get to know us. But yeah, Norm, I think we're going to end on that note. But what is just going with the ESOPs? So what is an ESOP, and what are your experiences, and you've worked with some companies that have adopted these things?
No, we designed some.
Yeah.
We've designed ESOPs 100. There are various grades of justice in the implementation of ESOPs, but some are better than others. The laws don't yet require that they extend voting rights, for example. And it doesn't mean that some do. And those who provide governance rights, voting rights, and equal access to capital. Right now, most of the companies, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure I know of any company that would do it in the ideal way that we who work through Equity Expansion International, we will no longer do any that just give shares in proportion to your relative pay. Because no one, if you use 100% leveraged ESOP, no one puts up their own money. We bought out companies 100% from the original owner without any of the employees putting up any of their money.
Oh, wow.
It was all done out of the profits of the company. And if it's well designed, you can combine a normal corporation with an S corp, which and that makes the ESOP trust, which is tax deductible. It is a tax exempt entity, and it covers all the employees, and they each have accounts in that. But it makes them the legal owner. And as as the law now stands, if you combine a regular ESOP with an S corp, there's no corporate taxes at all, because all profits then go right into the trust. They're used to pay for the shares. Let's say a bank makes the loan, so you bought out 100% of the shares. Let's say it's a 7-year loan, 1/7 of the shares each year get allocated. Now, under the typical ESOP, they allocate so that the CEO gets more shares than the janitor. But now we will no longer, we have done those. And frankly, I saw that they were not really just, because nobody puts up their own money. And therefore we say that when you allocate shares, it's a fundamental human right, that it should be equal. You could have differentials in pay, sure, but based on the value of your labor contribution. Okay, and some may get 2 and 3 or more times more than the janitor. But when it comes to the allocation of the shares, every year, as long as you're let's say 1/7 of the shares are paid for out of the full stream of future profits. So banks like that. It's a more secure loan. You would allocate equal shares each year, as long as you're there each year. If you leave the company, well, you don't continue to get more shares. New people coming in, or if you expand the company, then again, it's who is working. You might double. One of our clients were bought out 100% from one of the wealthiest landowners in the Washington area. They paid him. He got the fair market value. There were certain. He got what he wanted out of it. The workers bought it. They have about 4 times the number of employees. Mid-South building supply. It's considered to be a model. But again, I say, we will never do another ESOP unless it's equal division of shares as you pay off the loans. But it's still a model within the ESOP industry. But better models can be developed in the future.
Thanks so much, Norm, for your time. Again, we're going to do this again next week. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email Norm at thirdway@cesj.org. So that's third, you're going to spell out the word THIRD way at cesj.org. Or you can email me. My name is Brian Vosper, so BRYAN, V as in Victor, OSP as in Paul, ER @gmail.com. Or you can go on Instagram or Facebook and message me. My username on Instagram is @BVOSP, or you can go Hive Pomade, and we'll answer any questions you guys got. Last thing for anyone out there listening, Norm, what can they do today to help contribute, or like what would you like to see out of millennials today when it comes to CESJ?
I'd hope that each of them would take the idea seriously, raise questions, do some reading until the ideas that we promote will be their ideas, and they will teach others, and they will teach other generations, and eventually begin to organize as students did in the civil rights movement to bring about the changes in Federal Reserve policy, in the tax system. Incidentally, the tax system we have would be much different. But again, if they go to the articles section in the website, or go to the video section, they're going to learn a lot. Just visiting the front home page and looking at a 40-second series of at the top, they're gonna see in 40 seconds what the big picture is. But then it will also direct them to all of the materials that they would want to know and internalize, and then get their faculty, challenge the faculty on why aren't we teaching justice? Why are we not teaching the right of every person to become an owner when there's a system that can do it based on private property, based on a truly free market and competitive market system, not a monopoly, and limited economic power of the state. Economic power should be in the people, not in the state. The state is there to lift barriers to opportunity, to bring justice. So when enough students do this, we will change America. And if we change America, we're going to change the world. These ideas, we have a weekly program that reaches out to a week ago. It was about 93,000 people in 44 countries around the world were hearing the Just Third Way. It's called the Just Third Way Hour, and so they, again, it's like just as Brian's doing here to reach out to American millennials. There's someone in Australia who reaches out to people throughout the world, and so. But in other words, but it's still the bottom line is that CESJ cannot change the world, but the people who are listening, if they see that it makes sense, they will come together in an organized way to change the world.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for listening, guys. We hope you have a great week. Again, you guys got some homework. Go check out the site. Go watch some videos. If you have any questions, email Norm directly, thirdway@cesj.org. And thanks again. We hope you guys have a great week. See ya.